Welcome, Wastelanders, to another edition of Better Know a Faction, where I break down some of the special rules and tactics for different factions in Fallout Wasteland Warfare by Modiphius. This time around, we're going to be taking a look at the newest faction to enter the game, and the one that I've been the most excited for a long time, the Enclave. If you're new to Wasteland Warfare, or maybe you've only played some of the more recent Fallout video games, you might not be fully up to snuff about who the Enclave are. In a nutshell, these folks are the descendants and remnants of some of the more shadowy elements of the US government pre-war. And they've been launching plots on various groups of Wastelanders from their secret bunkers and military installations for decades, going back all the way to Fallout 2, and they were also the big bad guys in Fallout 3. They're arguably the most technologically advanced faction in the game and have access to high-tech weaponry like plasma rifles and next-generation power armor, as well as vertibirds. They're one of the most formidable forces around, and in Fallout Wasteland Warfare, this team is all about synergy. What do I mean by synergy? Well, that's giving and receiving buffs to other models and other units based on their special abilities. And the Enclave in particular achieves this through the use of aura abilities. Auras are special perks and effects listed on a unit's stat card and are marked with this little symbol. When a unit has an aura ability on its card, those effects are applied to any model within the unit's presence range, and a unit's presence range is determined by a colored symbol that looks like this. Whatever color is surrounding that symbol is the radius, not diameter, of the unit's aura ability. So if it shows green, then any other model that is within green range of your unit's base will be impacted and affected by the aura ability. Now, one very important thing to remember about aura abilities is that unless explicitly stated on the rule, aura abilities also affect the unit that generates the ability, as well as any units within their present range. This is key to remember when building your Enclave army in particular, because the amount of aura abilities they generate makes this faction absolutely deadly in a firefight, or when getting involved in a punch-up. So, that's auras. And now that we've got that under control, let's take a look at the Enclave training special rule and how the different units are able to use their auras to benefit each other. Now, the reference card is a little bit complicated, but the gist of it is this. The abilities with this little power armor symbol are the unit's Enclave training abilities. These abilities are only active when the unit is wearing either Enclave power armor or Hellfire power armor, and if there is at least one other unit with these same types of aura abilities, demarked by this little power armor symbol, that is within presence range and within line of sight. Now, there are some exceptions to the power armor portion of this rule, as the Enclave Lieutenant and the Warrant Officer units both count as wearing power armor for the sake of their aura abilities, even when they're not. So, just to recap, when two or more Enclave training units are wearing the right power armor and are within presence range and line of sight of one another, they give and receive each other all of their respective bonuses. So let's take a look at an example Enclave force list and see how these abilities can work together. The standard Enclave soldier comes in at 80 caps, the Tesla soldier at 85, and the Hellfire trooper at 90. Let's say that each the soldier and the Tesla both have Enclave armor on, which costs 44 caps, and the Hellfire trooper is, of course, wearing Hellfire armor for 52 caps. Let's give the two soldiers each a plasma rifle and the trooper a heavy incinerator and plasma pistol at 24, 25, and 6 caps, respectively. So that's going to bring this entire force to a manageable 474 points, so that's enough wiggle room to buy some upgrades or items if you're playing a 500-point game. Now, when all by themselves, these units are still pretty formidable, even when they're not gaining their Enclave abilities. But when they get within green range of each other, which is all of their respective presence ranges, the dice and the plasma really start to fly thanks to these really neat aura abilities. Now, the soldier is your dedicated shooter, if you want to think of it that way, with a perception of 7. But their melee is generated off an agility score of 4, not strength, like a lot of Brotherhood of Steel rivals generate their hits off of. And since the Enclave armor has a -1 to agility, that 4 to hit is actually going to be a 3 if you want to trigger its Enclave special abilities. When a standard soldier's Enclave rules are active, the soldier gives any eligible Enclave units an extra armor break die when attacking. On top of this, any short-range shoot actions that any of these units make avoid one piece of cover. This eliminates the -2 to hit and the +1 armor penalties that cover would give your target. Basically, having a soldier on your force is going to make it a lot easier to hit pretty much anything, but especially if they're in close range. Now, there's some debate about how effective armor break dice can really be, especially when in comparison to the black damage die, but I think they have their place. If you're fighting something that has a high armor but you don't do a lot of damage, or maybe you just don't have access to weapons that give you additional black die. Now, Tesla soldiers are great in hand-to-hand combat. With an agility of 7 and a strength of 6, which are bumped down to 6 and up to 8 respectively by their power armor, they're gonna be your bruisers. When its Enclave special abilities are active, the Tesla soldier gives any eligible units an extra green accuracy die when attacking, and they also eliminate the chance for any friendly fire when in melee combat thanks to their Mindful Aura ability. Now, they also pick up the Tesla Coil's power armor modification when wearing either Enclave or Hellfire armor, which deals damage to any nearby units at the end of their turn. Remember, though, that these Tesla coils will deal damage to both friendly and non-friendly units alike. So when you are getting up close and personal with these units, make sure that anyone you have along for the ride is a little bit out of that range. Now, as for Hellfire Troopers, these are by far my favorite. They were awesome in Fallout 3, and they're really, really cool in this game as well. They give off some really cool buffs, and they're arguably the most deadly, and the points cost reflects this, as they're the most expensive dedicated combat unit in the faction, with the exception of some special units, which we'll talk about in a bit. When its Enclave rules are active, the Hellfire Trooper gives any eligible units an extra black damage die. They also let any nearby units avoid penalties when using a ranged weapon in a melee close combat. When you have all 3 of these beefy units within green presence range of each other, they all get an extra yellow, green, and black die when attacking, and they all get buffs when shooting at a target in short range in cover, when shooting at a melee with a friendly in the fight, and when using a ranged weapon in a melee close combat. So if we imagine the Hellfire Trooper has all 3 of these buffs active, and it is in a melee fight using their plasma pistol, that unit will get 2 black, 2 green, and 1 yellow die when making this attack, as well as ignoring the penalties to hit, meaning that they're going to roll all of those dice with a natural 7 to hit. That is huge. If every die hits its maximum potential, which is unlikely but not impossible, that trooper is going to have a -6 to hit, deal 6 damage, and deal 2 armor breaks. Now, keep in mind that these individual benefits do not stack, meaning that you only get each named buff once. So even if you have 2 Hellfire units right next to each other, they're only ever going to get 1 extra black die when attacking. Same goes for the Tesla units, and same goes for the soldiers' green and yellow buffs. Now, another really cool thing about this faction that ties into their video game roots, freaking Deathclaw. The Enclave used trained Deathclaws in the video games, so this is a nod to that, and it's also a really quick way to add a very deadly unit to your force. Stepping away from the hack and slash units for just a minute, the Enclave also have some pretty cool objective runners on their force that you can bring along with you to better hack computers or pick some locks as well. Both the warrant officer and the lieutenant have a presence range that is black, not green like their combat brethren. So this means that they can hang out at the back of the field and still give their unit buffs. They also both count as wearing power armor for the sake of their Enclave training rules, so you get to save some caps by not putting on some armor and still activating their buffs. At 57 points, the LT lets the Enclave training units ignore 1 -2 penalty, and they also allow Enclave units to spend a quick action to move or charge on their turn if they have any additional action points. But for the money, the warrant officer is far more interesting as far as I'm concerned, because at 60 points, the warrant gives any eligible units an extra accuracy die when making any skill tests, and also allows units to spend a quick action to make a skill test. Now, this would be super handy in a search or hack focus scenario, and it's worth mentioning as well that the warrants can lockpick where the LTs cannot. Hellfire troopers can also lockpick, unlike the other combat units, but they only succeed on a 3, where the warrant has a much better chance at 6. Both the LT and the warrant also buff any friendly units by allowing them to ignore an enemy's battle cry, regardless of whether they have the Enclave training rules or not. So for the points, the warrant officer is going to be the way to go for me, especially when it comes to holding or gathering objectives. Now, speaking of objectives, the Science Specialist is the Enclave's best bet for hacking, and they have an intelligence skill of 8, and they also have the Genius perk, which stops them from getting locked out of any terminals that they attempt to hack. They also have an aura ability, which increases the intelligence of a friendly unit by 1 point. So that takes care of the basic units for the Enclave faction, and there are a lot of special rules to keep track of, but if you think that was crazy, you ain't seen nothing yet. So let's take a look at the unique units in this faction, starting with Colonel Augustus Autumn. Now, depending on how you played Fallout 3, Autumn is the bad guy with a capital B, and he's a badass in his own right in Fallout Wasteland Warfare. Like the Warrant and the Lieutenant, he has a presence range of black and gives any units in that range a VATS roll at the start of their turn. So basically, he has a chance to give everybody around him some free action points. This pairs well with either an LT or a Warrant because of their respective aura abilities, and this also gives your combat units more chances to shoot or punch. He also has the ability to bank critical points, so basically he's heroic without having to spend the 60 caps to make him heroic. He's also resistant to stun, which is a bit meh for me, but I mean, this could come in handy depending on what weapons or perks your opponent is playing with. He is a bit pricey though, coming in at 115 points all by his lonesome, but in my opinion, he's gonna be worth it if you have a cap limit that's over 500, and if you pair him with a warrant officer as your command and control units. Lastly, probably what a lot of you who've made it this far have been waiting to talk about, Frank freaking Horrigan. Frank is the final boss in Fallout 2, and his stat cards, plural, reflect this. Frank comes in at a whopping 600 points, so he's an army all to himself. He was the first legendary unit introduced in Wasteland Warfare, meaning that if you are able to punch through his 6 physical and energy armor and deplete his 5 health points, you still have to beat down 2 other versions of his stat card. Frank's second card has 4 armor across the board and 6 hit points, and his final form still has 3 armor, but only 4 hit points. And remember, he's also a super mutant, so he's completely immune to all radiation damage. That 6 armor can be a little bit confusing at first because you look at your armor die and you go, it only goes up to 4. With 6 armor, basically what that means is more often than not, Frank is always going to stop some armor because of just how beefy he is. If you roll a 1, he stops 1. You roll a 2, he stops 2. You roll a 3, he stops 3. You roll a 4, he stops 4. Because his armor is 6. But if you're able to break that armor down to a 3, then you're looking a little bit better. If you're able to add more damage to an attack, then you're able to cut his armor down a little bit quicker. Really what you're gonna want is what I call a dice salad of yellow and blacks. If you can get a couple armor breaks, even just 1 armor break, and a couple extra damage, you're gonna be doing a little bit better than you were before. It's still not gonna kill Frank Horrigan. It's Frank Horrigan. His weapons are also really, really terrifying, both dealing a base damage of 3. And when you consider the sheer volume of special rules this guy has across all 3 of his versions, Frank becomes nearly unstoppable. He has access to luck and critical banking in his first 2 forms, and for his first form, he has the unnerving ability, gains either a black or yellow die when taking damage. In his second stage, he's resistant to all conditions, gains free critical points on his activation, and can replace basic shooting damage with an auto cripple hit. In his last stage, he is now immune to all conditions, gains a free black and yellow die when making a melee attack, and gains a VATS roll at the start of his activation. Card 2 replaces card 1, and so on, if you're able to get his hit points down to 0, and all of his abilities switch depending on the card that you're currently fighting. Now, he can use most of the items in the game, most notably food, chems, and mods. But this is a small price to pay for being just an absolute unit. I can't wait to get my hands on one of these models because I want to see what it takes just to actually take him down. I mean, throwing a Deathclaw on him might not do anything. There's a Deathclaw on his base. Well, that's the Enclave broken down. Holy smokes. I hope this video helps you put together your Enclave list. I'm super excited to get my pre-orders, which should be showing up any day now as of this video recording. So just in time to start painting for that Christmas break. So thank you so much for watching again, and join us next time when we're going to take a look at the other guys in power armor, the mighty Brotherhood of Steel. Don't go far. War Games News Radio will be back.